so that we can follow along. Everything look good, producer?
It sure does.
Excellent. Okay, great. I was thrilled when James first reached out to me to ask if I would speak on this topic of really trying to promote positive body image in sport. This is something that's very close to my heart. It's been a big part of my practice over the years, and I think it's been a big missing piece in a lot of folks' awareness and toolkit. So thrilled that we are gathering tonight to be able to discuss this. And I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat box. So if ever, Mike, you see a really compelling question, you think that I've just zoned out and I'm going to miss it, please feel free to chime in and help me out, because that's your job as a producer.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, that'd be great if you could sort of have my back on that one. So yeah, we're going to be talking about enhancing positive body image in sport, and we're also going to talk about the things that don't enhance positive body image in sport. And please don't hesitate if you do have comments or questions or anything that you'd like to contribute during it. As we've said, please don't hesitate with the chat box, because try to make this as interactive as possible. There's a lot of info here, and hopefully this is going to strike a chord with some of you, so you're going to leave thinking about ways that you can actively and really purposefully take a look at your coaching and sphere of influence as a key influencer in sport and recreation to make a difference. So the BodySense program, I'm going to allude to that quite a bit tonight. This isn't just the BodySense program. Some of it has been some new additions. We're in a revision cycle now, because the program actually was initially established in 2004, and an iteration was piloted throughout the province of Ontario by 2009, and it was assumed by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. I was a facilitator for literally the last 11 years, and it is designed for multiple audiences. So the version that you're going to get tonight, and the messages that I'm going to provide you with in some of the video you're going to see, is uniquely for leaders, parents, coaches, and not necessarily for young impressionable athletes, because we are going to talk about some specific behaviors that we wouldn't probably mention in a session for the youth, or that could potentially trigger some disordered eating behaviors. So it's important to note that this is for the adult influencer audience, what we're going to be talking about tonight. I think it's overdue, and I'm excited that it's really on it's literally made front page news. There have been some documentaries in recent months in both high performance, but across the developmental spectrum. Sportsnet had a great, did anyone here happen to see the documentary by Sportsnet on body image and disorders, etc.? I'm not sure if any of you caught that, but if you can Google it, and I think it's out there for free. It might be on YouTube. I'm not 100% sure, but it's worth a watch, and it's overdue because partly because of the culture that every culture is unique in sport. We can really disconnect athletes and the parents and the leaders from some of these things that I've listed on the slide here. So some of our core values and maintaining these healthy practices get very skewed the further we start going down the competitive pathway. And not even necessarily the competitive pathway. This could just be in the participation pathway, or those who really recreate hard and can really interrupt healthy coping mechanisms for life. So the way that the BodySense curriculum and the whole program is designed, and how we deliver this when we're doing it when we used to do it old school, remember when we used to be able to meet in person? Remember those days? It's divided into 10 basics. And each of these basics, then, each of the athletes or coach and influencer cohort or parents are also given some tools that they can leave with so that they can reflect. And then some of them are actually inventories or self-tests or evaluation reflection sheets. and going to try as best I can to capture most of those ideas so that you can have a few of these tools or things to think about when you leave here tonight. So the first thing that we're going to start with, I really want you to be thinking about this now when you're thinking about yourself and your own beliefs. So this is completely pertaining to you. And so if you were to be trying to convey some of these thoughts of the BodySense principles to your athletes, these are the things that, whether they're consciously or unconsciously, filter through you every day as a leader and an influencer. So what you believe. And so to start, we're going to do a little bit of a quiz here, taking a look at these 6 questions. And there's much longer inventories we can use, but I thought we would just stick to these 6 for the purposes of tonight to keep things concise. So take note and take note of your answers, of what you think the answers are to these. So weighing athletes and testing body fat is always helpful to athletes. So think about that. Okay, so weighing athletes is always helpful to athletes. Think about that answer. Not every body shape is suited for sport pursuits. The teen years are when bone mass is built for life. The female athlete triad is the name for a combination of energy deficiency, menstrual disturbance, and loss of bone mass. It's normal for an athlete's menstrual periods to stop or not start at all. And then finally, social media has been found to have an overall positive effect on body image. Okay, so I'm interested. What did folks put for number 1? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. What was the first thing that popped into your head? Got lots of no's. Okay, so resounding no's on that one. How about not every body shape is suited for sport pursuits? Okay, so we've got mainly false on that one too. How about the teen years are when bone mass is built? Okay. Female athlete triad, so energy deficiency, menstrual disturbances, loss of bone mass. Okay. And it's normal for an athlete's menstrual periods to stop or not start at all. You folks are really acing this. It's amazing. And how about number 6? So the social media use been found to have an overall positive effect on body image. Yeah, we got some strong answers on that one. Okay, awesome. Okay, well, this gang needs to come and do a tutorial for some of the coaches that I work with, because you basically aced it. The only one that's a little, the jury's out. I personally agree with all of you who said that social media use has an overall negative effect, because there's some studies that are inconclusive, and there's some that rebut the previous study that said that they were promoting negative body image. But it really does depend. It depends on the platform. It depends on the antecedents or the biography of the athlete, right? But in general, let's just say it isn't a big positive party when it comes to social media use and its effects on body sense. So this term, anyone familiar with this term, fat talk? Does it ring any bells? Anyone ever heard it in sort of a clinical sense before? Not ringing any bells. So this was coined in the psychology community in the 90s, and it was a phenomenon that they noticed surfacing in preteen and teen girls, where it was almost like it was becoming this polarizing and almost this centrifuge of swirling conversations all around body image and size. And it was something that hadn't ever really been remarked on by the psychology community before. And they were wondering why it was manifesting so strongly with preteen and teen girls. And what they noticed is that it was replacing really meaningful talk. So about, personality, goals, just about anything else, why it was taking up so much space in their psyche. And there are lots of different studies as to why psychologists at that time felt that it was so. So it could have been the effects of media. And in those days, it would have been magazines and television and film, etc. But could there be something broader at play? Could there be something with body policing and this phenomenon of the sense of self eroding in these preteen and teen girls? And why was this fat talk and this obsession about shape and size taking over at such a young age and carrying on through the teens and well into adulthood? So this is where it all really started. And then we really started to notice it in sport. And what we try to get for this first BodySense basic is to get you to question your own beliefs as an influencer. So how do you talk about body when you use words to describe your body or your athletes' bodies or your students' bodies if you're a teacher? What imagery or messaging is around? So what posters do you have up? Do you have diverse body types? What kinds of vocabulary is used in the team setting or in your home setting? And very importantly, how do you measure success? So is a lot of the success in the language and the praise around image and less around performance? Or does it creep in there? And it might not even be coming from you, it might be coming from the athletes, but we may not be intervening when it starts to take over and when a phenomenon like fat talk starts to become a norm. So it's just something to listen for. So now that you know what it is, you know what to look for. And whether you're raising girls or boys or non-binary kids, it's irrelevant. It's across the gender spectrum. And we're seeing this across the board. So some of these words that I have on this screen here can trigger this type of thinking or this type of culture, of this idea of having a race weight, having an ideal body, being cut, being ripped, being on a diet, needing to lose weight or change body composition for performance. Sometimes just changing body composition or their perception of a weight that isn't appropriate for their sport. However, they've internalized that. And I'm going to play you a brief video of a triathlete named Heather Wertel, who's actually from the Okanagan Valley, who is she does sort of ultra distances and triathlons at all distances. And she talks a little bit about this phenomenon, what it's like being a triathlete and this sense of body and body alteration.
In triathlon and in most endurance sports, being at a healthy race weight is obviously advantageous. To an extent, the lighter you are, the easier it is to run, the faster you can go if you have a healthy power to weight ratio. It's not healthy, though, to think like, I need to lose a ton of weight. I need to totally change my body composition. I need to look like this image I have of a perfect athlete, because I look very different than a lot of other professional female athletes. And what matters is what I can do with my body and how I perform. Sometimes when you go to a race and you see, oh my goodness, this person is ripped and they just look so fit and I don't look like that. Surely they're going to be faster than me. It's a really dangerous place to go. Body size and shape can be so different. So what matters is what your body can do, how your body looks, and the work that you've put in. I'm 6'2". People always said, "Oh, well, she's too big to be a fast triathlete," and I sort of let that sink in and believe that. But when I said, "No, whatever, it doesn't matter what I look like. It doesn't matter that my physique is different than a lot of other women's. I know I can run fast and I can run fast under these conditions." And then when I believed it, that's when it started happening.
So she really had to question some of those externalized and internalized messages that she was receiving from the triathlon community. Because being a 6'2" woman and having some of those messages coming from coaches, coming from other athletes, and even coming from herself. I mean, that's a tidal wave of information coming at you. So some sports more than others, it can be very overwhelming for athletes that are just trying to figure out who they are, and then they get those messages on top of everything else. Oh, is my video? Oh, why is my video on? Sorry, James. So that's BodySense Basics, number one. So what are your beliefs about your body, yourself, the language that you use, the images you surround yourself, and the environment that is there cultivating that athlete? So that's the first lens that you can address, and something for you to think about tonight. You know, even sometimes I've given these to medical professionals and said, what kind of magazines do you have in your waiting room? Right? Take a good hard look at what's in there. You know, and now that you've taken this training, look again and see what's prevalent. And is that the kind of message that's congruent with your values as a sports science and medicine professional? And that often gets them thinking as well. So basics number 2, get and give the facts. So let's start talking science. Let's start talking facts if we're going to talk BodySense. One thing we do know from the research is that this concept of the good athlete and an athlete with really poor body image or disordered eating are actually very closely connected. And in fact, there are lots of characteristics that are very helpful to performance and harmful to health, the way that it's depicted on this slide here. And so some of those things are listed on this slide here. So maybe you can just think of some athletes right now, or young people that you know that are in your life who might fit this profile and that you might be thinking about, maybe even a little bit worried about. So the ones that are willing to train harder and longer than everybody else, that will perform through pain and injury, just uber committed to the team or whatever their venture is, their passion, follow those coaching instructions 100% and then some, are very perfectionist oriented and extremely high standards for themselves. And one very clear indicator would be the willingness to lose weight to improve performance, including even if you haven't said anything. So they've internalized this, that they need to do this. So this is how many coaches would describe, you know, this is that selfless, committed, excellent work ethic athlete, the kind of athlete I like to have. And yet at the same time, this is also very true of an athlete who might have an eating disorder or a very negative body image. So they can be one and the same, and we can hide in plain sight in sport. And this is the danger that, and why I think we need to start talking about this. We know from that earlier quiz, many of you are already familiar with this term of the female athlete triad. So for those of you that this is new, this is what this triad of conditions that coincide look like. So you've got energy deficiency, low bone density, and menstrual disturbance or amenorrhea. And so this is for athletes who menstruate, obviously. And this is the only one in our original curriculum in 2004. This is the only one that was mentioned. For the most part, we were very focused on athletes who identified as being female predominantly. We did talk about the gender spectrum and that anyone can be experiencing body image distress, but the prevalence at that time and the thinking was in the literature that girls and women in particular were most heavily affected by this. And then we recognized as the years went on and the research started to expand and our field started to recognize that we were having more and more boys and men and teens come into our offices, and sport medicine professionals are, we're all working together. And in fact, the International Olympic Committee made a consensus statement in 2014 to identify something broader than this concept of the female athlete triad. And they called it the relative energy deficiency syndrome. Affects all genders. And it's a tough one because it's a diagnosis of exclusion. In a nutshell, it's really just low energy availability. And this can be a result of disordered eating and exercise behaviors. in all genders, and it often goes misdiagnosed, and most often in male athletes. And this is due to a variety of factors, some of them social, some of them education. And these are some of the factors that you need to be looking at. So whether it's the endocrine system, metabolic, cardiovascular, menstrual function, and bone health, you'll see are also still form in the triad here. So they do appear, but it's the broader effect, and it goes all the way across the gender spectrum on energy deficiency. So this is what we're talking about now, and we're no longer just focused on girls and women. We're looking all across the gender spectrum for all athletes' welfare and trying to be more aware of these broader issues at play. I'm now going to show you a brief video as well that was produced by an Olympic diver who actually was brave enough to come out and really come public with his eating disorder and how it got there. And so I'm just going to let it speak for itself.
One of my friend, he was a diver as well. We got to the pool and we're changing, and he just grabbed a little bit of like my skin in my back, and I was like, why did you do that? He's like, well, I just wanted to feel how it was to be fat. There's a bunch of little stories like that I can tell you. I felt like if I wanted to be able to dive against the best of the world, not only did I have to improve my technique, but also had to improve the image I was giving to the judges from the moment I stand on that board. The year was very important if I wanted to qualify for 2012 Olympics. I didn't see the results coming fast enough, and I ended up eating absolutely nothing or almost nothing. The easiest way to hide it was to eat in front of people, and then after that, making myself throw up. I got so many good comments from athletes, from coaches, from judges telling me how good I was looking on the board, how confident I looked, and how finally I looked like an athlete. But there was a part of me who said, but wait, you will see. I will become even thinner. And at the London Olympics, I ended up having one of the best results of my career. I was okay with just surviving and just like being able to perform. And then after, I crashed. I lost control. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to say, I need you to help me. But I went to see my coach and I was like, I really need to talk to you about something that I've been dealing with for the past 2 years. I clearly remember that he just hugged me and he said that he would be there for me no matter what. In less than 2 days, I got help from Diving Canada and a psychologist. We needed to find the reason why it all happened. It was incredibly painful, but to me, those painful moments were necessary.
So this is fortuitous timing for this session because Bell Let's Talk Day is just coming up. And tomorrow night, actually, there's going to be a panel I'll be talking about a little bit later on, but there is a panel that'll be discussing mental health in sport. And I encourage all of you, if you're interested, to tune in to that. It's tomorrow. I'll make sure that I get the times, and maybe we can get it in the chat box at some point if my producer can find it. Maybe he can, he can put it in there. But yeah, that's one of very few videos that is out there with male athletes talking about their experiences with disordered eating or exercise disorder, it's still, I think, there's still a ton of stigma for all genders, but in particular, we have a long way to go to get boys and men talking about it. And I'm just wondering, just out of curiosity, for those of you that are on the line today, do any of you know of any men who have been, who have struggled with body image and exercise disorders? You know of anyone? Several. Yeah. And it, were they very open at talking about it or getting help, to your knowledge? Did they feel comfortable talking about it? Right. The problem that we find, in particular with boys and men, is that they have a lot of trouble with and he actually mentions it in the video, I'm not the kind of guy to ask for help. So instead, what he got a lot of positive reinforcement, and he was starving himself. And so those around him were reinforcing this physique and missing all of the other cues, and missing also the culture that had been created where you have teammates pinching each other and teasing each other using this fat talk, right? And it's often very subversive, and it's done under the surface, and it is high performance, but that does not just happen at high performance. That happens in sport at all levels. So it's something to keep our ear to the ground to. It's to find peer or team leaders who you have good relationship with, where you communicate closely with them so that they can also help self-monitor and monitor each other and take care of each other in this duty of care environment. So things to think about, because we know that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses. So that's a shocking statistic when you think about all the other mental illnesses we're including. Then we're talking about anxiety disorders and personality disorders and PTSD and depression, and it is the most fatal. So we need to start thinking about it. And we want to avoid athletes getting down to the road where they are on this dangerous precipice where he was. So that's number two. Let's get the facts. Let's make sure that we use really fact-based, sensitive language. We know what we're actually looking for when we're creating this culture, this healthy, challenging, but honoring duty of care culture when we're building our sport and recreation programs. So that's number two. And now on to basic number three. So respect for the individual. This is where the social media come in. So anyone feel like there are any particular social media platforms that they have found to be particularly destructive on body image and self-image? Just put them in the chat, the ones that you find. Jackie says Instagram. Oh yeah, Instagram's a huge one. Instagram also, Eric chimes in here. Everybody else think it's fairly unanimous? Maybe not everybody. Yeah, Instagram. I know we're all gonna hate on Instagram tonight. Do you know what, Sarah? I'm glad you put that in there. TikTok. TikTok can be pretty tough too. There are a lot of, well, they call them, you know, Thinspiration and Fitspo spokespersons on all of those platforms do a ton of damage to very young, impressionable brains and our kids. Oh, Snapchat's another good one, Sarah. Excellent. So we know this increase in body dissatisfaction and eating and exercise disorders has been linked by multiple studies now that social media has just taken off. And this negative self-image. And yet it's like how do you stop a moving train? And it's really tough because they're consuming it when, YOLO by Snapchat, inviting anonymous strangers to evaluate me. You've got to be kidding me. I didn't even know you could do that. Really? So what do you do exactly, Dasha? So do you put a picture of yourself up? Is that what it is? And just classmates or whoever. Wow. Wow. That's big. That's big. That's scary. So, and this extends beyond, of course, the athletes. So the athletes have all of that. So you've got your photo. Oh, you see, so you got your photo there, and then others all, yeah, take a look at it and rank you, right? So imagine what it's like for this young brain, this young little human who's still not fully cooked yet, and they get all of these external images, and including their own, and being evaluated by some of these platforms that now have this hypercritical and really disproportionate and skewed lens. So we know that that is a very tough and an overwhelming wave to be bucking up against. So these are some of the truths that we need to try to get out there through things like our influence in our homes, as parents, as peers, as coaches, as teachers, as recreation leaders, that every athlete, in fact, has their own unique set point. So that set point being where if you eat until you're full and you listen to your natural hunger cues and you exercise moderately and hopefully maintain that balance, both of them listening intuitively, your body will set itself at a comfortable state in that set point, and that everybody can excel in sport. The challenge is that the further we go up that performance pathways, and Heather Wertel talked about it, because she's in a sport like triathlon where you've got to defy gravity and you've got to take your body or your bike and take it up a hill as fast as possible. And sometimes it can lead the impression that smaller is better, but it's so much more complicated than smaller, right? Because it's all about strength and stamina and set point, which is why when she was discussing how you show up at the start line, you're going to see this disparity and some diversity in body types. But in some sports, there isn't a ton of diversity, and everybody is trying to model after the person to the right or the left of them. It's very tough to be the free thinker and the independent thinker like Heather. And it takes them many years to be able to pull away from that. So how can we ask a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, when grown adults are having a challenge doing that? So that's why it's our job as the coaches and the influencers to start to destroy these myths before they start. And I fear that unless we start talking about this earlier, and we really start getting the social media literacy moving much earlier and in a more powerful, meaningful way, we are going to miss the boat. And a lot of these issues are going to develop before we even know that they're there. So this is a new one for me, finding out about this YOLO by Snapchat. Wow. That doesn't sound great to me at all. And so, discussing also set point with them, what is set point? So on this slide here, these are examples of performance indicators. And so if you take a look at some of these words on the screen here, you've got things like speed. So we can measure for speed, power, stamina, strength, decision-making, athlete perception, or some might call it, if you're a basketball player, your basketball IQ, right? Coordination. So some of these things can be observed, they can be replicated, they can be nurtured, they can be taught, they can be enhanced, and they can be trained. And they really don't have anything to do with weight. Well, there is something to do with weight in here, but they are not the focus, and they are not where we would put our attention if we're trying to develop a culture of true performance indicators being the place where we put the stress. So can anyone think of what we're missing on this list for other performance indicators? Anything else that you could measure and that you could enhance in your athletes to help them perform better that might not be captured here? Some of these are sort of broader as well, so they cover a lot of little other details. But if I'm missing any, please let me know, because I'd like to be able to enhance this slide if you can think of any. So even though we know in multiple position papers by Chasm, flexibility is a great one. Jackie just threw in a great aspect of athlete performance that we can measure as well that really helps with a lot of sports flexibility. So many sports continue to use routine body comp testing, even though CHASM, so the sport medicine, oh yeah, confidence, another great one that Jennifer just put in here. Tough to measure, but it's still there for sure. I mean, confidence, there's lots of creative ways that you could measure and enhance confidence. Even if you didn't measure it, you could at least do sort of a subjective, bird's eye view of it and give opportunities for your athletes to improve their confidence, right? These are things that you want to really this is where we want to put our heart and soul and the focus into, versus the routine body comp testing that you got to at some point go, why am I even doing this anymore? Because I know that the impacts and the triggers that this could have on so many of my vulnerable athletes is really not worth it. Is the risk reward worth it, right? Some of the things we know are irrefutable or can contribute to this athlete's success. We've also got on here, we got genetics, right? We got nutrition, we got high quality coaching, physical and mental training. So many places we can put an emphasis, and yet some coaches continue to have daily weigh-ins, or they have team weigh-ins, or they post weights, and they post body composition results, and they drive home, the importance of this and bring this on the forefront versus all these other things from the previous slide that we should be talking about, or they don't balance the two. Alana also put in here as well. So performance and artistry. Oh, beautiful, because working with dancers, I love that. What gets measured matters, right? What gets measured matters. Remember that. So if you measure sportsmanship, right, and creativity and flexibility and speed and great decision making and being a great team player, that matters. If you measure by weight, if you measure by body comp and all outputs, and I know we have physiologists on the line, and I know James, and I always work with the physiologists and the all the sort of exercise science professionals and the mental health side and the sport medicine pros. We work as a team because we know every athlete is different and unique, and we need to honor that uniqueness. So loving all these awesome examples of true performance indicators that you can really stress on that don't involve weight, especially when they're at this really vulnerable age and stage where we have so much influence. So making sure we are measuring what matters, okay? So that's BodySense number 3. Any questions on any of them so far of the basics? And we can go back if ever we want to catch up on some of them. So that's our first 3. So the fourth one, developing a positive approach to food. And this can be tough for a coach because you don't always know if you're a coach or a teacher or an influencer in some other way. So you run some kind of recreational program and you're outdoors, and it's hard for you to be able to monitor what they're doing at home, but maybe you have some influence over the snacks that you pack when you go off on the hike, right? Or you're off on, trail riding, and the kinds of food and the way that you talk about food, and that it's not a punishment or necessarily a reward. It's just really valuable, important, awesome fuel that we all need. So you can get to know your athletes and figure out what's the right messaging that's going to work for them. I really try to take care, and I work with many dietitians when we're first starting out with programs and we're bringing in kids for the first time into this performance environment, or even not necessarily a performance environment, work a lot with the school districts as well. And we're having to undo a lot of thinking, a lot of dichotomous thinking and black and white thinking about food, good food, bad food. Some folks, what would be something that we could say instead of something that's good food? What could we call, or bad food rather? What could we call what I'm sure you can all imagine would classify as bad food, like potato chips, for example, often get labeled as bad food. What would be something that we could say, or maybe that you already use, that's less labeling than bad food. Anyone got anything that they happen to use that doesn't like vilify the food? Non-optimal, exactly. Like, this isn't the ideal one for right now. Like, this is not, the best recovery food. This is not the optimal food prior to a performance, right? Some coaches have told me they call it treat. Some people say treat, fun food. I was like, it's fun. This is just fun food. It's got low nutritive value, right? So we know that it's not necessarily super nutrient dense. Let's put it that way. But avoiding giving it some kind of a punitive label. And then conversely, making things overly good, right? So you've got this good battle between good and evil, which is something, if someone is on that tipping point of the continuum of disordered eating, this is the kind of language and the kind of thinking that can sometimes get out of hand and helps to put them over the edge as well. So we can start to deprogram some of that, demystify that, and normalize eating all across the spectrum of different types of food. It's just about how much and maybe when, right? And how we view it. Having a fuel tank, so talking about it in a way like fuel of those nutrient-rich snacks and foods and meals, and really teaching athletes and our students and the folks that are in our programs to really enjoy and have fun in the process of making them and purchasing food and learning about it, and just seeing it as awesome versus something to be feared or measured constantly and obsessively. And also listening to your body. So getting them, I do a lot of work once athletes, for those of my athletes that I work with that are already struggling with disordered eating or they're in recovery, and I'm trying to help support them while they're in recovery, really to listen to those inner cues. What does it feel like to eat when you're actually hungry? So you eat when you're hungry, and then stop when you are full and starting to feel uncomfortable. So getting them to reintroduce these cues. And I know a lot of athletes have been telling me their cues are out of whack due to COVID-19 because they're being overshadowed by emotions, right? Anyone been eating their emotions at all during COVID? I'm not sure if anyone wants to admit to that in the chat box. But I know I've had a lot of folks tell me that they've found their appetite cues almost seem really skewed. Yeah, baking a lot. Me too. baking, cooking, and I love cooking and baking. It's the cues, lots of sweets. We're craving comfort. I'm sure you've read all these articles that are out there about all the baking, bread, and Sarah's got a glass of wine in there too, which is excellent. So really having, and autumn, that's another one. So just boredom eating, right? It's like, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm just eating because I'm bored. And again, we don't want to get into this really black and white thinking world or dichotomous thinking where it's good or bad. Sometimes, yeah, you're just going to go for a snack because the fridge is open. Okay. And that's fine. But if that's your pattern all day, every day, and you start to see that you're not feeling good anymore, you're feeling sick, you're feeling like you're low energy because the choices that you're picking are not high nutrient food and you're leading to sugar crash, then we need to talk about that, right? And start thinking about the choices that we're making. But again, just avoiding the labeling, the food being fuel and awesome, and you always talk about food in a positive light, and that we want to really listen to our body and see if we can recultivate the natural cues that we might have suppressed when we're super bored or we've got something big going on like a pandemic. It's going to be harder to listen to some of those cues. So that's basic number 4. Has anyone here ever cooked with their teams or done any, if there are any teachers on here, anyone do any cooking or kind of stuff with food as part of your team? I'm not sure if anyone's done that. So Eric has do team meals on the road. Yeah, they're really awesome. They're a great team building thing. And then Dasha says, loves cooking with her students, love it. talked about food and fueling up. Sarah's done that. Excellent. So all of those things are amazing. So just talking about them, talking about food prep, I mean, these are also life lessons, especially if we're working with young people that aren't living independently yet. Getting them to be part of the grocery trips. There are a lot of amazing, I think James mentioned he's going to have a dietitian on later in his performance series. And, getting some tips from a dietitian to help you think about putting together that fuel tank or that those meals, or maybe they're protein balls that keep well and that can travel with you. Those can be really helpful as well. We got Sarah in here also says, talked about fueling and celiac, and as celiac athlete, so touching base with her a lot. Exactly. So talking about sensitivities, talking about allergies, talking about personalizing things, right? And discovering food like it's an adventure versus something to be afraid of. And so if we start to normalize that, demystify and take away the power from the influence of the diet industry that would have you think that only certain foods can be eaten, right? Only certain supplements and powders work. We can break free from that, and we can help train young people to never get caught up in that web, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is about 5% effective. So how you like them odds? Not great. It's an industry that is designed to fail, and it particularly targets athletes who are particularly vulnerable, because they are in a pressure cooker environment where they are led to believe that they must radically modify their body in order to meet certain expectations and norms. Now, as Heather said, there is a certain continuum within where you might want to have the healthiest ratios closest to your set point, where your energy is maximized and your mental capacity is also matched. But the diet industry would have that all turned upside down, and they sell you one thing, but it's a bait and switch, and ultimately it's doomed for failure. So we know that we want to start talking about this with our athletes and getting them social or critical and social media literate on the types of things that they're seeing on Instagram and Twitter that are popping up in their ads, and all the influencers that are doing all the workouts and saying you have to do it this way. There's so many different ways and options out there for them to do what's right for them. Another thing to think about is where we might want to put the focus. And so we came up with 3 A's to remember. So listening for and responding to the internal cues. And someone earlier wrote in the chat box that boredom was something that would be a trigger for them to go and eat sometimes, not necessarily a hunger cue. So wanting to introduce, again, understanding and self-awareness on their feelings and their emotions. So I'm feeling sad right now. That's what I'm actually feeling. I'm feeling sad. So what are some different ways that we can help with that sadness to cope, right? And if it's been a pattern that it's food that they've been using to cope, or other habits that aren't serving them any longer, and there might be something broader for us to expand with them and search. These are some of the conversations that we as leaders can have, or we can deliver it as a conversation or a team discussion on some of these cues, and making them more self-aware of what those cues feel like. The second one being appreciation, and appreciating the pleasures that our body can provide and what it can do. So less about the language of what they look like, which is omnipresent, of course. And it's really omnipresent on social media. There's a lot about the looks, right? Because it's a very visual medium. It's really tough to get under the surface on social media, but it isn't as difficult when we're building real meaningful relationships with the people that we engage with in our programs. So appreciating what your body can do, the majesty and the amazing things that the human body is capable of, that really don't have to focus so much on what they look like. And then the third one being acceptance. And there's been a new, has anyone heard of the body positive movement? So that's really gained a lot of traction over maybe the last 10 years. And just folks talking about body diversity, basically. And sport has struggled with that because it actually flies in the face of some of the very myths that athletes and coaches alike would hold themselves to have to uphold, that they have to look superior somehow. There's an ideal that they're looking up to. And there's going to be a brief video a little later where someone talks a little bit about those ideals and what that feels like from their perspective. So it's a tough order to ask someone to accept who they are if they fall outside this prescribed norm that they might be seeing that isn't even real on social media, that so many of the images are so heavily filtered and edited as it is. So let's teach them the social media literacy to know what's real and to accept these awesome strengths that they have. One exercise I'll sometimes do with athletes is I'll have them go around and talk about their strengths and really not focusing on looks at all, just talking about their strengths as a human, and why they're amazing on this team. And if they're too shy to do them about themselves, they can do it about their teammates. So you don't talk about yourself. You have to basically give a compliment about someone that's on your team. And that's a really great way to pull the focus and the measuring to something that matters. Some of these other positive traits. Oops, hang on a second. Let me set this one up. So this quick video is one I do a lot of work directly with the athletes, sometimes working with athletes that are already struggling or in sports or programs where they've identified they're having a lot of issues that are surfacing with athletes and body dissatisfaction. And this is a great video, and it's a series by Nike. I have a love-hate relationship with Nike because sometimes they're really on brand and do some really great things and great messaging, but sometimes have other sponsorship deals that are disingenuous to some of these values. But I'll leave that as an aside. My producer and I can talk about that later. But I'm just going to show this great video, and it's a world-class triple jumper from Italy, Simone Lamantia, and just talking what it's like being as a young girl and not having her body fit in. So it's one of the videos that I like to play in some of the sessions that I do.
My legs were too long. There was no way to hide them. Not fitting in gave me a reason to stand out.
So it's just a fun little eye-catching conversation starter, especially when I'm working with younger children, preteens sometimes. But I think it really transcends age. Talking about, not fitting in gave me a reason to stand out. You don't have to look like everyone. There is a sport, there is an activity, there is a joy and a passion for everyone. And your body is an amazing, beautiful instrument. And we need to figure out how to reconcile those two. And I think that our sports system sometimes helps us work against ourselves. So if we can start rewriting some of these messages early on, I think we give this next generation a much better head start into some body love. So I'm just reading here too. Mike's been looking for that game plan chat that is going to be happening tomorrow night. And I'm going to, we might be able to find it at the end when we're doing some, or do you send out, Mike, do you send out mailing lists or do you have a place on the Basin Plays website where you put postings?
Yeah, we put upcoming events, and specifically for the gender equity collaborative, there's a project page that we can put events that are related to this topic in there, or other places. But so I'm happy to share it. I just, I was sure that just a straight up Google search
I
was.
know. Well, maybe it's, you know what, it might be more embedded than I thought it was. So I might have to follow up with you on that, and maybe you can just add it to the page.
Yeah, no problem. I was just
You were
feeling
just on
I
it because
failed.
you're
I failed as your producer on that one. My apologies.
well, you're not getting a bonus. You're not getting a bonus. I'm telling you that.
Oh, man.
That much I know. That much. I know. and so it begins. But we'll find that, and we'll make sure to get it up on the website. But there are other, I mean, at this juncture, we're not going to get into a ton of detail on some of the clinical eating disorders and what it could look like. There are so many, and it would almost be a workshop all its own, really. And what I think we could talk about is at least just have a better idea of some of the broader conditions that you might want to be looking for, and to give you some of the websites where you might want to find out more. So probably the best one that is most comprehensive in the Canadian context is the National Eating Disorders website. It's basically a catchment for all things to do with body image and disordered eating prevention and treatment. And it's called NEDIC. And I believe it's just nedic.ca. I know I'm a service provider listed on that website. And you've got here some of the clinical eating disorders that probably you're familiar with some of them. So anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder has got some of the similar characteristics of anorexia and bulimia, except that they don't have the body image distress. They just restrict and avoid, but it's not because of a distressing internal desire to look a certain way. So it's different in that sense. And then also there are other specified feeding and eating disorders that would fall under the clinical eating disorder realm. And then you also have some informal definitions, and one being anorexia athletica. And this, some would call it, other names for it are, obsessive exercising. I've seen it as exercise addiction would be another one. And then orthorexia has really gained momentum in, on discussion boards, and I think on social media as well. Has anyone heard of orthorexia? Seen that term before? Familiar with that term? How about clean eating? Just the concept of clean eating, what does that say to you? If you heard clean eating, does that sound familiar? It's kind of made the rounds. Lots of cookbooks, and I think some of the intention in the early days when the clean eating movement started, this concept of very nutrient dense foods, but it started to really head down the road of very dichotomous thinking again, very, very yes and no, good, bad labeling. And the problem with that is when it's taken into this more informal definition realm, subclinical, but nonetheless can really disturb someone's daily functioning, is that they can only eat foods that they deem to be clean or meet this very particular criteria, to the point where you literally can't function, because you can't go to a restaurant, because you can't verify exactly how everything is cooked unless you're leaning over the chef's shoulder. And it can be socially debilitating. It can be very tough on families, very difficult for the athletes to function in a team setting. It's a lot of shame. Someone has got here in the chat box, very bad eating disorder way, the shamed part, right? So if you eat dirty, like that's just a no-no, right? So it starts out, and on the surface, when it begins, it's like, oh, well, look at me. I'm making a lifestyle change. I'm prioritizing health. I'm doing all these things. But it can head down this really rapid descent into difficulty being able to function. And so Alana offers up here, my son was a victim of this in his high school, and it was so hard. Oh, it happens so often across the gender spectrum. Worked with a football team where they had a trainer, and it was actually coming from the trainer, because the trainer, who, by the way, had no background in dietetics, so I'm not really sure where he's getting his information, but he had this very strict info sheets and texts that he would send out, and the team could only eat, off this very restrictive menu. And it was a one size fits all. And you've got guys that are completely different shapes and sizes, different, totally different genetic profile, different positions, even different energy demands. And it was like, how is this happening? But athletes are so susceptible to suggestion and wanting to fit in and wanting to fit this mold, that they are the perfect receptors for these messages, and from the marketing for those that want to make money off that. So again, arming them with this. Youth today like to be informed. They like to be in the know. And you know what else they like? They like being disruptors. So the more that you can tell them that they are disrupting the system, the more they might be apt to absorb some of this information and really start to turn things around. So that disruptor element is very seductive to a teenager. So let's use it, right? Let's use it for young people. Let's use it for folks of all ages that don't want to be taken advantage of. Let's awaken the giant, right? Let's let them recognize that they can actually be part of a revolution where we can take our body love back, and we can do it in the context of sport, right? So let's just decide that we're going to measure what matters. And if we do have to measure something like body composition, we're going to do it in a respectful, science-based, with the consultation of mental health professionals way. So just putting that out there. So that's BodySense basic number 5. Now we get into number 6, and it's promoting sense of self, their value as a person, and promoting self-esteem. And you know what? That includes you too, leaders and parents and coaches, because it really starts with us. It's back to BodySense basic number 1. What do you believe? Because what you believe and what you absorb and exude will then impact everybody else who's influenced around you. So this promotion of positive self-esteem is also the cultivating of something bigger in their development. And I work with so many amazing coaches. I know James does too, out in Columbia Basin. Across the Okanagan, we have so many talented, caring, wonderful teachers, parents, coaches who are passionate about sport, passionate about physical activity and recreation. And at the same time, sometimes we get so passionate, we get so myopic on that one dimension of that athlete, we forget to create the latitude and the space for them to explore all those other things and bring those other things to the team. I remember once working with a provincial coach when I still lived in Ontario, and I won't say what sport since this is being recorded. I would never do that anyway. But I remember one of the athletes wanted to bring their guitar, and he was really upset about it, and he refused the athlete to bring the guitar because he felt it showed a lack of focus and it was going to be a big distraction. And I think about that, and I think about the broader context in which it was delivered. And as I got to know him over the years that we worked together, I saw where there were some really fundamental differences in the way that I was brought up by my coaches, where they really celebrated my whole self. And I felt like I could bring all those external talents to, whether it was the field hockey field or the track or the pool. And he didn't feel like he could. And I think it's probably because he was coached by someone similar. And it was the message coming from his parents. So we can undo that stuff. We can explore some of these icons that I've got listed here on the screen: the artist, the dancer, the adventurer, the musician, we can let our athletes and encourage them to be multidimensional and to make them feel great about all the different elements of self and all the different things that are dimensions of who they are. We can also make them alive to this concept of self-talk. And I'm sure many of you have heard about this before and have read in positive psychology how the way that you have that, you curate that internal dialogue is really important. It's a reflection of what is to be and what we believe about ourselves. So get them to listen and become a little bit more aware to that self-talk and to shift it if it's not in the direction that they want it to be, and to motivate themselves. So making sure that awareness is there, and maybe go through some exercises with it as a team of, what are some of the things that you say to yourselves when you're feeling down, or when you're lacking confidence, or when you're preparing for a competition? What are some of the things that you could do that could empower yourself? So let's give them a voice. Let's give them a strong platform on which they can build that confidence and that self-esteem. And I introduced this concept of ants, largely because it's just easy to remember. So the automatic negative thoughts, they're in there kind of invading and wreaking havoc. And we have the ability and the right to question them when some of these messages aren't serving us, and especially when they aren't particularly factual. So introducing the concept of the automatic negative thought, it's involuntary, it's, part of our history, but we don't, and it may still come, but we don't have to absorb it. We don't have to act on it. And frankly, we don't even need to believe it. So the earlier we can start introducing this type of concept, you'd be surprised how young children are receptive to this concept, and certainly teens and young people. So just making yourself and them aware of being able to enhance this skill in themselves. So that's number 6. Number 7 is inviting assertion. And like I said earlier, this is where I think this next generation coming up right now, iGen, they're calling it, they are going to disrupt a lot of things. They're already in the midst of it. And it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be a good thing for them to be able to know how to question, the world around them. And it isn't saying that every other generation, including mine, I'm a Gen Xer, just put our head down and accepted everything. But I think we didn't have the hyperstimuli that today's generation has. And we didn't have the concepts of climate change when we were 11 years old, right? It was there. We just didn't know about it. And there are so many big, broad external movements that could cause stress on an athlete today that they need to be able to question and assert and really use their voice. So making sure that our programs, even though we're talking about our body image, how we enhance it is we give them a voice. So they need to think about their own thoughts and opinions, and they need to question others' thoughts and opinions as well as their own, and teach them to respectfully dissent sometimes, right? So this isn't, an exercise in trying to create disruptive brats. This is about creating thoughtful, self-reflective, evolved, and really contributing athletes that are going to change the system because they demand more. And today's athletes are questioning some of the stigma around mental health, for example, for the first time. And really, I think, changing the conversation around the duty of care that we have to their health and welfare, which is a really great thing. So let's keep the ball rolling. And one thing, if you hear them saying this phrase that they feel fat, this is one example of emotion talk. Remember that fat actually isn't a feeling. So what are they really feeling when they say that they're fat? I'm feeling inadequate, maybe. I'm feeling like I don't measure up. I'm feeling unattractive, to this person over here. So whatever it is, give it a broader voice than this little word with 3 letters. that has come to mean so much more than what it really means. So again, some of the discussion building that you can have with them. So that's number 7. And then basic number 8, we get into coping. So how do we help them cope? We talked a little earlier about everybody baking and cooking and doing all kinds of things during the pandemic, but making sure that we have a broad slate of coping skills. I think athletes that already had a pretty broad slate are faring better in the pandemic than those whose slate was fairly short. So how can we enhance some of those coping skills? Give them some stress management. You can mentor that by showing yourself how you manage your own stress, how you solve problems, or encourage them to use their problem solving skills. And much like the previous one, to find their voice. So assertiveness and speak up. Athlete is much less likely to develop disordered eating if they have a really strong sense of self and are able to speak up and question the status quo on a lot of things. It's a dimension that will help galvanize and maybe even inoculate them from going down that road. It's not a cure-all, and it's not a guarantee, but they're less likely to than someone who is a total rule follower, head down, I'll do whatever you say. So never thought I'd say this, especially about my own kids, to question me, but we actually do want them to do that if we want them to develop a strong sense of self. Here are some other things. What measured matters, right? They can focus on setting goals, what their thoughts are, enhancing their focus so they can learn focusing skills and distraction management, effort, seeing positive images, their reactions to things, right? So any of these, and this can be a really great team brainstorm exercise. So you just, think of it as a Zoom chalk talk, or you could just do it, before you get together to go for a group ride or a hike. Just talk about, what are we going to focus on while we're on this walk today? Let's think great, empowering things. What can we focus on? Where can we put our energy today? And make sure that it's something within their control. Empower them. Make them feel like they have agency. We want to cultivate that sense of agency. Again, that's another thing that will inoculate them from some of these other limiting thoughts and habits that can descend into disordered eating and exercise disorders. And foster a growth mindset. Do any of you use this growth mindset? Maybe we've got some teachers or coaches on the line today. Have you seen this before? The concept of a fixed versus a growth mindset? Yeah, we've got a few here. Mike has, and Dasha. Awesome. So excellent. So this idea that there's just so much flex in possibility, right? We want them to focus on things like work ethic and not just outcomes. We want them to fail. We want them to learn to take feedback in an open-hearted way versus being super defensive. These are life skills. So the more that we create that environment in our teams, in our programs, in our gyms, in our schools, in our homes, the more we're going to have kids that are resilient and will be able to buck up against a system that might want them to fit in a little box. And they might hurt themselves trying to fit into that box, right? So this idea of growth mindset, and if this is a new concept to you, so much amazing work out there. It was coined by Carol Dweck, a psychologist in the US, and her research started out in education, but has gone so much beyond there. And sport has borrowed a lot from this concept of growth mindset. So she has a book called Mindset, if you're interested. But I should be getting some kind of kickback from her, I think, the number of times I promote it. So other coping strategies, have a brainstorm with your team or your program or your classroom or even your kids, right? What are some ways we can manage? And I'm sure a lot of folks have been having this conversation during these past months in the pandemic. It's been challenging for humanity. So what are some coping strategies that we know that we can cultivate in them, that can come from them, and that they can use moving forward. One example too, another thing that we've really been noticing a lot in my practice is that bedtime rituals are just, they're so challenged with bedtimes. So again, building a relaxation mechanism that they can use. Quickly, I know I'm getting close to my time here, and I've only got 2 more basics and they're real quick. So the role modeling effect, very similar, tied back to number 1. So just making sure that what you are doing and the folks that you're surrounding your program with are the role models that hopefully they're going to want to be looking up to. And making sure that some of the messages too that are coming from those role models, make sure that you amplify those voices and cultivate that same mindset as you're spreading it amongst your team, your class, your family, wherever that may be. Maybe you can curate some of those role model lists. And the last one being balance in sport and their outside life. So that comes in a little bit tied in with this self-esteem and the assertion piece that I mentioned earlier. But also we know that athletes that have an overly strong athlete identity are really at risk for having body image issues. And what that might look like is their only friends are athletes. Their mood is directly determined by sport performance. Their only interests are sport, really. Primary family focus as well is just sport. Very curated sense of sport, so very antiseptic, almost like a mythical view versus a reality-based one, and missing the full picture of those high performance athletes that they look up to, not knowing perhaps some of the bigger picture that might be going on that perpetuates some of these myths. And so to close, I'm just going to give a brief video about exactly this phenomenon of a disproportionate athlete identity. Oops, okay, it's the next slide. So they're just talking about athletes saying they've started speaking out, wishing that they'd had more interests, wishing they'd had a stronger, more balanced sense of self, and wishing they'd understood the business of sport and how many myths it sells. And this is the talk and the film that's going to be aired in the link that I was sending my producer to go and find, but he couldn't find. That's happening tomorrow. So here's a brief clip of what that video looks like.
Michael Phelps is one of the fastest swimmers in the world.
None of us had normal childhoods.
I want to win.
I knew it was the biggest stage that I would perform for in my life.
We're Olympians. That's what defines you. Athletes work their entire lives for this moment.
I wanted to do everything I could to be the best skater I could.
Everything revolves around this sole focus, and that sole focus is the Olympics. And now the next 40 seconds will dictate our human lives.
But after the Olympics, the village doors close, and that's kind of it.
Win or lose, I felt a dramatic emptiness.
We're just so lost. A good 80%, maybe more, go through some kind of post-Olympic depression.
It's gold, and then what?
I didn't develop outside interests.
I thought of myself as just a swimmer and not a human being. That's where I was just like, why don't I just end it all?
From the outside, it's like you got everything.
Athletes just don't talk about our weaknesses.
That just cracks the facade.
Mainstream media love building somebody up and then come crashing down.
Depression puts you into a spiral. You start getting deeper and deeper into it.
He was my best friend.
We have to do something. And this is important.
Youth around the world watch and look up to these people. I've given my blood, sweat, and tears. And all I'm asking is that someone can help me get through this.
We're human. I don't think I have to say anything else.
look at you, Mike. You get the bonus again now. The bonus is back. Okay, he found it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, Andrea was digging around in the background and found it. When you said game plan, then we went, oh, that's where we look.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's fantastic. So there it is. So up there, if you're interested, so that's the talk happening tomorrow. I believe it's tomorrow. Am I right on that?
It is tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So
Eastern.
3 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. because some people on this call are in Mountain time. We got a lot of time zones working with us here, but
exactly.
yeah, it looks really interesting.
It's a fascinating film. I've seen it. It's fascinating, and it's everything that I've been wishing we could talk about for the last 20 years. And we have some really influential athletes who are willing to do so. So again, if we're going to think about the role models, if we're going to think about this mythology that we sell, that we overpromise in sport and frankly underdeliver a lot of times, we need to give the real picture. And we need to build in balance. You heard a few of them say, I wish I had other interests. I had no other interests. And then when it was over, it was over. And there was nothing else. And so many of them fall into eating and exercise disorders because of this. So there are ways, steps all along the way that we can inoculate our athletes from going down that road, but we will have to rebuild the system. And it will begin with everybody on this call, everybody in Columbia Basin who is part of a caring, broad community that wants to cultivate healthy, active living, amazing families, communities that are brought together by sport. We've just got to do it, Mike. That's all we got to do. No big deal.
Just that. Okay, no problem.
We just got to do the BodySense basics. It's perfect, And but that's pretty much that's it. That's it in a nutshell. And I'm sorry I've taken up all your time, but I did try to ask the questions and get some comments along the way. But I don't know if anybody has a few right before we go.
Right. So that's what I was going to say. I was going to say thank you very much, Shaunna. That was a very informative presentation, and I think a lot of good information for us to move forward. But anybody have any questions right now before we go that you want to pose? You can unmute and pose it verbally even.
Please do. Here's some voices if we need some. Yes. I hope everybody took something from that. Even if you only applied 3 of the 10 basics, or even just focused on one and just absolutely nailed it, and chipped away. I really sincerely hope that some of this was interesting and resonated with you. And I hope some of you have a chance to tune in tomorrow as well.
Yeah, there is one question Jackie asked, what is the proper way to approach an athlete you believe might have an issue with eating?
Well, it actually sort of depends on your relationship with them. There's a lot of it depends stuff. And I actually have a really great info sheet that I could send you, Jackie, if you're interested. And maybe, you know what I could do, Mike? I can give it to you and you can maybe vet it to folks.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Sounds okay. Yeah, because there's a few variables that you need to think about, and it's a continuum, right? It's this slide, previous slide here. A lot of athletes travel up and down this continuum, and they might be in the distress mode, and you want to kind of get it before the train takes off. But it will depend on a few things before I would want to give you an answer to that one. But thank you. That's an excellent question.
I want to remind those of you who are still on the call, I know a few people have had to already leave. Through the Basin Plays program, there is basinplays.org that's been created as a one-stop shop for all things sport and physical literacy in the Columbia Basin. That's the hope. That's the end goal. And I know some of you have already been on there and connected to it. If you go there and create a login and join some of these project pages, when they get updated, you get notified, right? So it's interactive. So it's not a static website that you have to go to. It will reach out to you and go, hey, there's this new thing that just happened. Like this workshop. I was messaging people who were part of the Gender Equity Collaborative group, would have got message today saying, hey, there's still time. If you haven't signed on, you should for this. So I put in the chat the link to that website to the event section. So there's an event section that has, we've already added the game plan one to the hub while this presentation was happening. So it's there, and a bunch of other really great resources. So I encourage you to go check it out.
Awesome.
And while you're there, you can message other people, and it's kind of this hybrid of a website and a social media site together. So it has all this functionality that we're hoping to be able to connect and build a tight-knit sport community and physical literacy community on there. So that's our goal.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. And if you have any questions about that and how your organization can sign up and have a presence on there, you can contact me, and we'll walk you through it. So that's the other thing that we're doing. Thank you everybody for your time tonight. Especially thank you, Dr. Shaunna. I felt really privileged to be your producer for tonight's.
You really pulled through, Mike, and you had some assistance, I understand. But thanks for being my co-pilot. That was awesome.
Behind every successful man is a really great woman. Okay. She's back there.
Not going to argue with that. I'm honestly not going to argue with that. Like, it's just a fact.
It's just a fact.
It's just a
All
fact.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We will, when the recording is ready, we'll post it on the hub. So if you know people who had signed up or people that you think should watch the recording of this workshop, you will find it there. Yeah, thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone. Nice to virtually meet you.